right, today on the ADA book, we have a different type of episode. I have invited Isla Waite to the show, and she's going to provide even more insight on the accessibility industry. And so today we're just going to have a conversation where we talk about what's going on behind the scenes in accessibility. Isla, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Chris.
It's good to see you too. And we'll talk about how we connected in a second. But first, I'm going to introduce you. So Isla is a mission-driven accessibility professional and supporting California's organizations to be accountable to their inclusive dreams and ideals. Isla, can you tell everyone more about yourself?
Yes, I'll try and keep it brief. I'm only 4 or 5 years into my own accessibility journey. And I recently founded a company. It was April last year because I had learned so much and I was ready to bring my mission to California. And I know we're going to talk more about it, but I know there are many companies and designers and developers that need support in making this transition to an accessible world. And that's where I was driven to help.
And before we start, what is the name of your company?
Simply Accessible Websites.
And I will include a link to that in the description. So Isla and I met just recently on a webinar where we were talking about AB-1757. So Isla, can you tell everyone really what is AB-1757?
AB-1757 is a bill in California. Many would argue it's a gut and amend of a previous bill. So it's been around for a couple of years, but the new version was 1757. And it's called internet websites, which I find a redundant expression myself, because what else is on the internet but websites? Yeah. And it came about, as far as I understand it, because lots and lots of, let's say, for example, restaurants were being sued for inaccessible menus and that kind of thing. And obviously restaurateurs are quite upset about that. And I believe the Restaurant Association in California was one of the original steerers of the bill. And the bill kind of changes the focus and allows companies, private companies in California, to turn around once they've been sued to then sue the builder of their website. So the developer or the agency behind the website.
Yeah, and this bill actually gets somewhat confusing because they've had so many different iterations. Is it on its third or fourth one? I can't remember.
Oh, I think it's on its 10th.
And I've actually covered it on the channel, and every time it's like they've go back to the drawing board and they come up with something like almost completely different. Like it's almost like something else entirely, but every time it's only invited litigation through its wording. And so we were both, I was speaking out against it, and I know you're against it as well. So you just emailed me, what was it, yesterday, and told me the bill was dead. So that actually takes care of a lot of the questions that I had in mind. But like, what happened to AB 1757?
Yeah, it's been a journey. So last week, August 15th, it was meant to appear out of the suspense file. It's called, Suspense Day, and all of these bills that have been sitting in the file come out, and there are tens of them, 50, 60 bills coming out in one day, and they have to like churn through them and get votes on them. So I was sitting there holding my breath, waiting for it to pop up when the Representative Calra's bills were coming up, and it wasn't there. Completely didn't show up. So I have a good friend and confidant who is a lobbyist, and I emailed him and said, well, what does this mean? And it had been held in committee, which generally means some large voice had opposed it to the point that it just wasn't going to make it to the floor. So then we know that there's still a chance of it coming out before, the August 31st deadline. So again, we're all holding our breath waiting. And yesterday I stumbled upon a Capitol track that was on the Disability Rights of California website. And there was some legislative language on there about failed. So I sent that to my friend and said, what does this mean exactly? And he said, that means the bill is dead. That is legislative language that the bill is dead. And I actually have been in contact with him this morning a little bit, and he said that, there's this much chance that somebody could drag it back out, but he said it has been through so many iterations that it's so convoluted, it's dead. Yay.
That's really good news because I don't think people quite realize how much havoc would have been wreaked if this
Mm,
would have passed.
hmm.
This was a very, very dangerously worded bill. And that's what when we were on the webinar, that's what was covered is like, this could really devastate, especially small business, but everybody. And it
Yeah.
would really impact the economy the way it was worded.
Yep.
So that's why we're talking about this is like, we're not going to get too far into the bill because the good thing is it's dead for
Mhm.
now, but
Yep.
hopefully stays that way. But this is the type of legislation that you really have to look out for because it comes in and then if it passed, people wouldn't even know about it and people would be being sued. And it's not just the website owners, right?
Right.
It's the developers, it's the
Yep.
designers, it's
Yep.
everybody who's working on the website. So it was a really, really dangerous bill. But that is why it's so important to be aware, of these different bills that come up because this one in California, the wording was just inviting lawsuits.
Yeah. Yeah. It really was. And I think a lot of people think, well, that could be expensive going to court, but most of these cases wouldn't even go to court. You would have to settle just to get rid of it. And because there are so many people involved, the business owner is sitting there going, well, I'm going to sue my developer. Developers have to turn on each other because certainly if you have a WordPress website, you've got a bunch of different software involved in that website. So then you have to flag all these people to say, well, it was one of their faults. Actually, somebody could have worked on their own website and made it inaccessible in a heartbeat by uploading an image that doesn't have alt text. And it's very subjective that the plaintiff gets to say this was a barrier on the website. And then there's this whole exploration. And I am an accessibility advocate. And I think this makes my position very odd. But that's one of the biggest reasons I wanted to speak out. We're kind of blindly accepting bills these days. People aren't really reading them. And it was on reading this less than 6 months ago that to what you said, it's so dangerous for small businesses. And ironically, it was written to stop all of these lawsuits against, small restaurants, small hotels. But let's just create a bunch more small lawsuits where people have to settle against developers.
Yeah, it doesn't resolve anything. It only
No.
furthers it. So, and you just touched upon something that I wanted to ask you because when we were on the webinar, I distinctly remember you saying you felt somewhat, I'm paraphrasing, but you felt somewhat conflicted about opposing a bill on digital accessibility.
Yep.
Why did you feel so conflicted?
Yeah, really good question. I am involved now in the accessibility community. I'm involved in a conference through WordPress. It's called WordPress Accessibility Day. I call myself a professional over an advocate because, I'm not out there doing this, but I am aware of what's happening and I want to help. So it's my profession. But in some threads within the community, of course, when I say this bill is not a good bill for small businesses, I get pushback. There is tension there for sure. And some of the people pushing back have never owned a business and
Yeah,
they work inside
yeah,
huge conglomerates or, large healthcare, and they don't know what it's like to run a business and they don't know how dangerous this bill could have been to 40-50% of web developers in California. Our California is already suffering, a lot of people would say, because people are leaving California to own businesses elsewhere because California is not making it very easy to own a business. And that's a whole other political conversation. But yeah, it causes tension, I think, within the community. And I don't want to shy away from that because I want to be a professional and an advocate, but I also want to be realistic about running a business and not seeing all of my friends having to close shop.
well, and that's getting at the practical reality of this is
Mm,
like taking a militant approach to accessibility through the law is not going to help anything. All that's going to
yeah,
do is enrich the plaintiff's lawyers.
yeah,
And we need to leave them out of this. And we
yeah.
need to, I hate the idea that everything has to be perfect. I
Hmm.
also hate the idea that we can't have a fully WCAG conformant website. We can, but it is very difficult. And as you said, a lot of people that insist upon being militant, they're not actually doing it because when you actually do it, you realize, oh, you know,
Yep.
I I uploaded this image and maybe you weren't prompted at the time and you didn't have the alt text in place or you didn't mark it as decorative or whatever the case is, maybe your color contrast, you weren't checking on this, or you uploaded a theme. It is so easy to have an accessibility issue, and we shouldn't insist upon like it has to be this or else you're discriminating against people with disabilities. It's quite the opposite. There is a lot of good momentum towards accessibility, but it can't be so strict that we penalize someone severely. And that's getting back to AB 1757. People would be severely penalized for having any accessibility issues. That's what the law read. So yeah, I think we have to get away from this idea that it's all or nothing. It is very difficult to be completely accessible all of the time. There has to be some allowance for, oh, okay, you made a mistake. It might not even be that you didn't understand the accessibility consideration. Maybe you just made a mistake or you were careless one time. It is so easy to be careless. I mean, just like I'm thinking about, my writing. Sometimes I go back and I look at my writing and I'm like, I wrote that? Like there's a huge mistake there. And I know exactly what I'm doing, but I still made a mistake. So we have to account for the imperfections, or else it's just going to end up we're going to end up in a sea of lawsuits.
And people are still learning. So few designers, developers, project managers really at this point understand what needs to be done. And if they look at WCAG, they're going to run away scared. When I first saw it, oh my goodness, what? How am I supposed to follow this?
Yeah.
And being in the community, you realize this is a journey. You have to slowly bring this stuff on board because it takes time to learn. And certainly for developers, it's such a huge change to their workflow. And it doesn't mean they don't want to do it. It just has to happen slowly but surely. And that's the same as accessibility in general. There is no silver bullet. People might think an overlay is a silver bullet, but we could talk about that later. But that's not how to do this. It has to be a journey. And even once a website is remediated or built, you have to continue the work. Whether it's the developer that's doing that or you teach the team to take care, like you say, as they're uploading things and working on the website, it's ongoing. And coming back to the bill, all of that was on the developer. If somebody on the in-house team makes a mistake, it's on the developer. If some third-party source of information is uploaded or linked to, it's on the developer, which is tremendously brutal and doesn't make any sense because this needs to be a team effort from everyone involved in this website.
It really does. And I think one thing that I increasingly come across is people don't realize that you can have a very skilled developer or a very, very skilled designer, and accessibility is a specialized subset of knowledge. They don't come with this. Like it's not something that they're going to have because they're a great developer. It's something that they have to learn just like everyone else. And so even we shouldn't hold them to the standard where it's like, well, you're a developer, you should know this. Like, no, they have to learn it just like everyone else.
Yeah. And even then, they're not necessarily the people that should be testing to attest that this website is accessible. There are, a handful of professionals in California who have that ability and the authority to say, yes, I attest that this website in this moment is accessible. And that's another thing. There's language that is so misleading. People think they can certify that a website is accessible. Well, certification is a bad idea because tomorrow your website might be inaccessible, depending on what somebody did to it. It's very, very fluid and nothing is set in stone. So in that moment, when somebody tests it, it might be accessible, but that could change tomorrow. Well, and again, for whoever can attest to that, there are not enough of those people.
Do offer certification, but you bring up a good point because I tell clients this, the freshness of the document, it loses its freshness as soon as you make one change. The certification is really just there. It doesn't mean it's no good, but it also means that you would have to literally go back and test every single thing and then go check that and then come back and say, okay, it's accessible again. So it's just like, it's getting back to this idea of perfection. It's like, people think that you can be like, it's like, okay, I'm done. It's like, you're not done. You just have to make sure that you maintain that accessibility. And that's what I try to tell people. But I think, the more and more I talk to clients, the more I realize it takes them time for this to all sink in. And it's coming, a lot of information is coming right away.
Right. And back to the bill, It's on the developer to explain to a company, okay, you need accessibility because it's the right thing to do, and here are all these business reasons why you should do it. Had the bill passed, the developer is basically defending themselves and trying to say, okay, you need to do this because I might get sued. But the business practice that would have to change for the agency or the developer is ginormous, and that expense has to be passed on to the client. So all of a sudden, you've got to figure out how to attest that this website is accessible. You've got to do manual testing on a regular basis. Now, I'm all about manual testing. It's fantastic. You need that. You need disabled people to experience your website and tell you what's wrong with it. Great. But again, these developers who have no idea and agencies who are still learning have to figure out how to charge for that and make sure that they can still make any money. And the small mom and pop and freelance and independents would go out of business trying to make sure those costs are covered.
What are your thoughts on overlay widgets?
Yeah, I can totally relate to those questions. And most people wouldn't know most potential clients wouldn't know what to call them. I've been asked, oh, hey, can I get the little guy, in the corner of my website, this guy? Because that's like overlay widgets have the monopoly on that little icon, which is frustrating because, it's used everywhere for everything accessibility. But when you see that on a website, the client is thinking, great, get me one of those and I am covered. No, I learned early on that overlays were not the way to go. And, practically everybody in the community would agree. And it's tough because the companies making those things are ginormous. And it's an easy fix if you're a client when you look at that and you go, oh, that's $40 a month. Great. Let's just do that. And then I'm covered. And I look at websites with these things all the time and they crack me up because, we have a blind organization in, I'll say California. And I looked at their website and they have an overlay and it's the color contrast is you can't even read it. So they're failing at the first post and yet they're selling these things and people are trusting that they work. They are trusting that my website is now accessible. And there's just a huge knowledge gap about what accessibility really means. It doesn't mean meeting standards and the law. It means an equitable experience for everyone who looks at your website. Right? What does equitable mean? Well, that's a huge up for debate, right? But people need to find their information. They need to be able to see the forms, fill in the forms, do all the things in an equitable fashion. And these overlays don't make that happen. In fact, oftentimes they interfere with software that a blind person or low vision person might already be using to help them on the internet. And they have to turn the widget off if they can find how to do that. Yeah.
What do you think about this situation we have where you have so many new customers and clients that are entering the marketplace and they are being educated on accessibility as they are being sold on accessibility?
Ask me the question again.
So what do you think about this situation we're in where we have so many new entrants into the marketplace and they don't know accessibility? So, but they're looking for, some type, whatever they need for accessibility, they're looking for it. But at the same time, they're being educated by the very people that are trying to sell them whatever, quote unquote solutions there are or they're offering. So just what strikes you about that dynamic? I always talk about how you don't want to be educated by sellers. And I realize there's some irony because I'm a seller, but generally you don't want to be educated as you are being sold on accessibility.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And most people buying a website don't have time to go and educate themselves on anything. You brought up privacy in terms of service and all this stuff that most people wouldn't even think about, and they want somebody else to take care of it. And again, this comes back to the developer perhaps being responsible for everything. If that bill had passed, I'm now responsible for educating you. I have to charge you an increased, project price because I have to cover my costs here of regular manual testing and such. It comes down to, I think it comes down to making it part of your package, and that's it. It isn't negotiable. This is what we're doing. And then you're going to lose clients because you're doing that. I do think it's very tricky, but I find personally, I have to educate my clients on so many things that it becomes part, here's the thing we need to talk about. let's talk about terms of service. Let's talk about accessibility. And in California in particular, people are aware that there is a conversation, even if they don't know what the conversation is. So a lot of them are appreciative of learning more. And then I explain our process. When this is not an add-on. Accessibility is not an add-on. You don't get to choose it. It's part of the process. We're doing it from the beginning. So we're checking absolutely everything we do constantly. And then we do one big audit at the end. And then we show you that and say, here's where we are right now. And you need to maintain this. So now we need to train your people. And it's a whole process. And if you're asking, again, developer Joe over there, who doesn't know what the heck is going on, Joe's going to run scared and pretend he doesn't know anything about it because he might get sued.
Well, they might talk to you, which would be a lot better than if they talk to, like, if you talk to the wrong person, such as an overlay company, they're going to give, like, they won't give you what you just told us. They'll give you a completely different answer. And so they will reroute you right to where they make money, but not where you incrementally improve accessibility.
100%. And one of my peers who I've been working with for, gosh, I don't know, 6 to 8 years or something on various accessible things, he had an overlay company on the phone. Like, they approached him. And I think maybe this is part of what they do. Let's just find people to phone, call, whatever. And he said, yeah, okay, let's have a conversation. And he was humoring them. And they're on the phone saying, well, this is what you should do. And then you can sell it to all of your people at a markup and blah, blah, blah. And, we'll make these websites WCAG compliant, ADA compliant, blah, blah. And he said, but what about if I get sued? And they said, well, we offer a package just in case. And I heard more recently that somebody did try to say, hey, I got sued, overlay company, you're going to help me, right? And nothing happened.
Yeah.
And then you turn around and try and hold them accountable. And it's important that the only way to do that is a civil suit. But you can't.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, what I've noticed, especially not so much recently, but years ago, or maybe even still now, you have this constant finessing of language to, it's like, oh, this isn't the entire solution. This is a part of the solution. Well, then it's like, well, okay, well, what part of the solution is this? What exactly am I accomplishing here with this widget? And there is no good answer. So that would be a great, a great recording.
Yeah.
If you had someone on there that understood accessibility, listened to them, and then just unraveled everything, because again, it goes back to the education. They only get away with it because the customers that are coming to them don't understand what they need.
No,
so
they really don't.
Yeah, it's very much.
And they want somebody to solve it.
And they do. And
the reason, yeah, that's
and
it.
they'll tell you everything you want to hear.
Yeah, they will. They will. And it's
So,
frightening.
Something I have wondered about, and I still don't have the answer to this. Maybe you do. What is the lure that they have over people? Why are so many people obsessed with that little icon or that logo or the widget? Why? Because people are drawn to this. I have specifically told a client, and this was years ago, but I have told a client directly, this will not make your website accessible. It won't make your website ADA compliant, and it's not going to stop a lawsuit. She still wanted it. It did not matter. There was like a hold over here. So what do you think it is?
Again, I think it's a knowledge thing, because most of the people who visit our clients' websites would think the same thing. They would think, oh, this website's doing things for accessibility. Great. I like their brand more. I think it's even less about making the website accessibility as it is about impressions. And it looks to their clients and their visitors that they are doing something. I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of still not misunderstanding, but lack of knowledge that accessibility isn't only about blindness. There are thousands and thousands of different disabilities that affect the way somebody interacts with the internet. From loss of a limb to all these cognitive issues. My dad has Alzheimer's, which is one of my big motivators for, helping with information. I've seen him struggling with it. He's more progressed now, but I've seen him struggling in the past. And I thought, wow, people don't get it. They think it's just about blindness, and it's not.
No, it goes so much further beyond that. But I think one reason people key in on people who are blind or visually impaired is because that's what the lawsuits involve
Right.
typically, right?
Yeah.
Almost all
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
lawsuits. Occasionally there will be someone with a different disability, but usually it's someone who is blind or visually impaired who
Mhm.
is the plaintiff. And that gets back to most of my clients are interested in how do I not get sued? It's not accessibility, it's how do I not get sued? And I
Yeah.
completely understand that.
Yeah.
And, we want to, there's no reason that plaintiffs' lawyers have to be involved in this. We can move towards accessibility and leave out the plaintiffs' lawyers because they are getting an absolute windfall out of this. There's no legal precedent. And just, I think website owners,
Easy. It's easy money.
it
Easy
is, it
money.
is. And website owners need more of a chance. And this really does come back to the Department of Justice. They're the ones that are in charge here, and they have stated informally that you have to make your websites and mobile apps ADA compliant. But
Mm.
they've stated you have flexibility in how you do, so long as you do, which leads us right back to where we are, endless litigation, just
Yeah.
continuing.
Endless.
It's an absolute onslaught.
Yeah. 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 What is the answer? I don't know that it's laws that, penalize the people doing the work.
Yeah, I think it's just it's a balanced and well-reasoned law, and just also recognizing, when we get into the digital world, things get so granular. Like just think about media. We can break down a show to the point where we're talking about, one of the characters' clothes that they were wearing in one scene, and it's just like things get so specific. And with accessibility, it can get that specific too. And it's like we can't always have full coverage 100% of the time. It's just not going to happen. So I think that's what needs to change is just that balancing and understanding the practical reality. It's like this is not easy to do. And if it is so easy, then I go ahead and try. Like go ahead and do this
Yeah.
yourself. And when we were on that webinar, I pointed out California.gov, CA.gov had accessibility issues. How are you going to have this militant law that is so
And
penalizing?
check out the DMV. Sorry.
Right? I mean, it's just like this is any number of government websites, and it's
Yeah.
nothing against the websites or the developers. It's just the reality that it's easy to have outstanding accessibility issues.
Yeah.
Even when you're trying to be on top of everything, it's easy to have an issue. So
And it's easy to create new ones.
it really is. It really is. And I think, one thing you talked about that I wanted to add a comment to is we have this, we have the messaging of accessibility, and it's like nobody's against accessibility, but it's the bending and the messaging to try to use accessibility, leverage the impetus towards accessibility, and divert that energy into something that doesn't help accessibility at all. And I think that happens a lot. So it's something that, it's actually made this environment even more confusing for people because
Yeah.
there's so much different messaging, there's so much confusion. And a lot of people, even if they spend an hour, they're still confused.
Yeah. And I think in general, we're creating a culture of fear. And that's not the way to be progressive at all. I think again, that's kind of ironic in California. Like we're supposed to be progressive, but all we're gonna do is take people out of business. What?
Well, that gets to my next question. So website accessibility lawsuits, what do you
Yeah.
think? Good or bad overall, or can you just give your thoughts on them in general?
I inherently don't like them, but I also have a tendency to see the good in people and assume they're not screwing up on purpose. I don't think developers are out there, oh, let me do this because it will make this website inaccessible. And no, no one's doing that. And I think, I often look at what's happening in Europe, and they have spent a good number of years coming up with their overarching directive, which I think is a really good way to go. And our federal government could help there. But, at the granular level, it gives somebody using a website an opportunity to email the problem or alert to a problem on a website and say, hey, I encountered this problem. And I think there's some back and forth there about getting it fixed without a lawsuit. And I feel like that's where we should be. And I know I have peers who agree with that. Yes, we need to be alerted to the problems. Please do alert us to the problems. That's how people are going to learn. But then we need an opportunity, and it needs to be a window of more than 90 days, which is what the bill wanted, for people to be able to fix things and to be able to do it and not go out of business. So yeah, we need to create a culture of learning, not a culture of fear.
Do you think the years of lawsuits have been, what, I'll just ask you open-ended. What do you think about the preceding lawsuits? Not looking into the future, but just as it
Yeah.
stands, like, what do you think about the impact of website accessibility lawsuits?
Impact of web accessibility.
Like, have they been good overall, or have they been bad overall? Or like, what do you see the positives and the negatives from
I
the?
don't think they've been good in that it's not hard to uncover that there are, X amount of plaintiffs and X amount of law firms involved. And certainly in New York, this was a big deal. Loads and loads and loads of people getting sued. But when you really look closely, it's a handful of people behind all of those lawsuits. And that's not okay. I don't think it's helping accessibility in general. I think people are seeing only the headlines of the bad news, and not taking the time, and that's not always their fault, but not taking the time to uncover what the goals of accessibility really are, which is what I hope to do. That's why I'm on this path, is just to help bring people into the fold and understand what this is. And it's a journey, and don't be scared of it. And it's for the good of humanity at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of lawsuits. I get why they're there, but I think it should be a absolute last resort. And you shouldn't be allowed to just sue somebody. There should be feedback. There should maybe be a fine or something like that. Lawsuits should be an absolute last resort. And even then, there should be a mediator between, the plaintiff and their lawyers, and whoever is on this side, the developer, the company, whoever. The person mediating needs to actually know what accessibility is. And that was something that was hugely lacking in this bill. It didn't mention experts at all. Nowhere. So how do you know what to fix, how to fix it? Yeah. How do you know when it's done? It didn't even mention that kind of thing.
It did
I
not.
don't think that was going to help.
And this is, I think the way I look at it is this is abusive litigation. I think that's very easy to recognize. I think there has been some positive effect that has come of that, in that we now have tremendous momentum for digital accessibility. But
Yeah.
the plaintiffs' lawyers don't get credit for that because they have taken a windfall. So by abusing the legal, the court system, really, and taking advantage of the ambiguity surrounding digital accessibility, you don't get credit for the positive change that comes of that, because you yourself have been profiting enormously. So
Yeah.
I think, yes, there has been some good that has come this serial litigation, but it's not, we don't need to engage in serial litigation to affect change. And so what would be much better is if we approach this in a way where we advance accessibility without losing. I mean, it's hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, probably even in the billions of dollars. And there's no need for us to just throw that, like that money's really just thrown away to actors who have not provided any value to society. So yes, they can have this virtue signaling that they are, beacons for accessibility and so forth. But you can't claim that while also gaining a windfall, right? Like you're not, the virtue is not there because of what you are doing to reach this result. So I think, yes, good result, but ultimately it's coming up it's coming as a result of bad actions. So we need to fix like the underlying mechanism that's producing the good effect. And if that's the case, then yeah, if we see more accessibility, that's great. But it shouldn't be because I'm going and suing every small business in a neighborhood.
Right.
That's just not the way to get there. And it creates a negative stigma.
Yeah. Yeah. Some would argue that, lawsuits are good in that they bring attention to the problem. So that's progression. Some would argue that it's any coverage is good coverage, right?
Right.
But I think we're missing a big piece of the puzzle, and the problem is these larger companies that provide software for anyone to build a website. Some of those have la 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 going on, and hundreds of thousands of people are using their software. So let's start there. Let's start with laws for them before we go attacking the people using that software to build websites.
Well, I have noticed that a lot of them aren't like you're right. It's like they don't want to pay attention to this. This is something that they don't really want to look into, even though, the majority, or maybe not the majority, but a significant portion of their customer base is dramatically affected by the accessibility features they do not include.
Right.
So, and I'm not saying that they should be, obviously they can't be responsible for the customizations, but you can do more out of the box and you have the resources to do so. So why are you being silent on this?
Yeah. Why are you? That's a great question.
Yeah,
It's a
I mean,
great question.
I have a few videos on it. It's like, well, again, this gets back into the idea of like, you don't have to do everything, but why not start somewhere and then progress from there? You can really advance accessibility by just doing a few things. And then if you have those in place, you do a few more. And you can really improve the user experience through this. But yet it's like you said, it's like, I don't want to pay attention to this. I know this is going on. We have I can read threads and forums where people are asking like, "Hey, is our are you ADA compliant?" Nothing. Like nobody responds.
Yeah, I've experienced that personally, and I know my good peers have experienced it too. One of them in particular, like weekly, is like, "Hey, this is wrong. Hey, we can't do this. Hey, are you listening?" And crickets, nothing. And one of them recently came out with their own, crickets for years, and now they have their new accessibility solution, which you have to pay for, and is basically an overlay. So, what?
What do people not know about the accessibility industry?
Good question. The industry. I think ultimately that it's much broader and deeper than people might get the impression of. It's about much more than ramps, and it's about much more than screen readers. It's about including, every human being who has access to a device to be able to use that device to get the information that they need. And I believe the people who are in the accessibility industry who are not, yahoos just trying to make a dime, that's why they're in it, because they have maybe personal experience like me in watching my dad struggle with using a device, doing something on the internet. And once you've witnessed somebody using a screen reader to do anything on the internet, it's incredible. It's quite incredible to watch and witness their daily experiences of doing what we do and take for granted all the time. And we live on the internet. Not even during COVID. Before that, we were living on the internet. We do everything on the internet. And everyone should be able to do that. And that's what the accessibility industry, in my opinion, is all about. And I think the more people who are doing and sharing their knowledge for free, as far as they can, those people, I believe, are in it for the right reasons. And get to know them. That's what I say. If you come across somebody who's just talking about accessibility, listen to them. Listen to the language and dig in.
What do you think about making money from accessibility?
Very good question. Obviously, my new business is going simply accessible websites. I saw a potential market and I thought, and it's a passion and a mission. So I could marry I've reached a point in my life where I could marry all these things. That sounded great to me. And I'm excited to be doing this. But the most exciting part is the education and having people go, whoa, I didn't know that. Like, that's really important. And that's what I love about it. So yes, I am going to hopefully, I have some clients. That's great. I'm going to make some money building accessible websites, remediating accessible websites. But the part that gets me the most jazzed is going into an in-house design team and saying, you can change your processes. Like, this is about changing a mindset of how you approach your projects. And them going, oh, it's not as difficult as maybe we thought. So yeah, people are doing all kinds of things for accessibility, but I think, again, ultimately, they want to see better global access to the internet.
Definitely. And is there tension from within the industry?
Oh yeah. I would say so.
Why
Because
is
everyone's got an opinion.
why is there so much tension on the different opinions? Why are there so many different there's definitely tension. Like you can like just going through LinkedIn, you can pick it up. But
Yep.
I don't I think you have a better feel for the behind the scenes. What is it that causes people to like brush up against each other in accessibility?
I think there's a number of things at play, and it's a good topic you bring up, because I think a lot of it comes back to confusion about, like you said, there are just so many different messages all over the place and nobody knows what we're supposed to be doing. So there's that. But also, you've got the EDI, which is a huge topic as well, and accessibility is obviously part of that. It's being inclusive. And there's some fear about getting it wrong. Nobody wants to exclude people on purpose, but people tread carefully because of EDI. And yeah, we're all sort of adjusting to what that is, and rightly so. And accessibility is a part of it. But I think a lot of it comes back to money, because I have to change my processes. Well, that's going to cost money. Oh, I have to ask these people to invest in that. Like, you have to explain to them why they need to pay for it. That's a little bit scary.
Can you
It's a mindset change for everybody.
can you explain what EDI is?
Yes. Equity, diversity, and inclusion. Is that right? I should know this. Oh my goodness. But I always focus on inclusivity. That's how I talk about this in California, because I genuinely want to be inclusive. But when you explain, okay, inclusive on the internet right now, this is what this looks like. It's a process, and we have to keep checking in to make sure your website continues to be inclusive. And that's like a wake-up call to them. It's like, oh, okay, this is a change. This is a change in how I approach my digital presence, because it's social media too. Very few people are doing social media correctly as far as accessibility.
I don't think as many organizations want to be inclusive as much as they would like to say they're inclusive.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why I want to hold them accountable.
yeah, that's why we need to pay you so that you can hold them accountable. I think people are looking for a box they can check, but when that
Yeah,
box becomes difficult to check, they no longer care as much. And what I have noticed over and over again, people will say they care, but
yeah,
when it comes to it, their actions tell you they
yeah,
absolutely do not care.
yeah, 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 yeah,
It's like I know you have a program and I know you have commercials with people with different races, but do you actually care about inclusion, or do
yeah.
you only care when it's easy
Check in the box.
to
Yeah,
be inclusive? And they don't.
yeah, yeah. You're right. It's about for a lot of them, it is about checking a box, and that's sad but true.
And there are, that's not to say that there aren't, a handful of companies that really like, sometimes they'll get a client and they are like, you can tell the difference. You can definitely tell the difference when they come to you, and it's not so much of like, paying attention to a lawsuit, although that's always a concern and understandably so. But there are some organizations that are really just they're asking other questions around accessibility where you can tell they're thinking
Yep.
larger than just like, how do I make my website accessible real quick?
Yeah, yeah. Because the knock-on effects, for example, if a veteran wants to donate to some veterans nonprofit and the donate button doesn't work for that person, well, they're going to second guess that nonprofit and think, well, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll go somewhere else. I mean, the knock-on effects of not being accessible and not anticipating that somebody with some disability is going to come to your website is a big oversight for a lot of companies. We've all heard it. Oh, I don't have disabled people using my website. Really? Are you sure about that? Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of
And
ignorance out there, which is a shame.
And I don't have, if somebody doesn't care about accessibility and they just like, hey, let me get this over with, I understand. Like, not
Mm,
everybody can be involved in every last thing. But what I dislike is when you have these companies that say that they really care about inclusion, but then they don't care. Like there's a big difference there. Like for a small business, I understand. You're just trying to get through this. If you can make your website accessible, that's all that really
yeah,
counts anyway. But if you have this
yep.
diversity and inclusion program, and then all of a sudden, like you just can't be bothered to care about people with disabilities, that's very disingenuous. And I think that's what's so
Yeah.
problematic for me.
Yeah, and so many people with good intentions open a shop on Shopify and they genuinely care about, these are the single independents we're talking about, and they genuinely care about being inclusive, and they get told that, or they get sued,
Yes, yes.
they don't know how to fix that, but they just got sued. They don't know what the language even means that in the letter that says this thing doesn't work, because they just don't, it's just not their realm to understand code and color contrast and all of that. They're just busy trying to run a business.
And I've had so many small business owners genuinely tell me, and I completely believe them, if somebody had just told me this was a problem, I would have fixed it. Like, and I 100%, there's been so many where they say that with conviction, and I absolutely believe them, but they're not aware. They're just sued first, and then they have to deal with
Yeah.
it. And then
Yeah.
now it's like, I recently had a client, she just outright took her website down because it was too much.
Right.
Just like, I can't deal with this.
That's awful.
Yeah. And it happens a lot because this is so expensive that it's just absolutely devastating for a lot of smaller businesses.
Yep. And I think there's been more than one case, certainly one that was in the news, or in maybe a local news. I think it was a state agency who got sued, a very small local agency, could not afford to fix it. So accessibility for the person that brought the case becomes inaccessibility for everyone because the website got taken down.
Yes. Yeah.
And that there's something very wrong there.
Yeah. And that's why, the harsh penalty route, there's not enough cushion there. You need some cushion, you need some understanding, and that's just not is what is being afforded right now. So,
which is why I fully believe in alerting to the problem, lots of time to educate, not 90 days. That drives me insane. Lots of time. And then check-ins with the person, the expert that truly knows what's happening. That's how to move this needle, in my opinion.
well, that is a really nice transition to my next question, which here I want to ask about advice for website owners. So, what is the number one thing people need to know when it comes to making their websites accessible? Or, many people are after ADA compliance. What is the number one thing that people need to know?
I'm like, did I make a note about this?
Or at least it doesn't have to be the exact number one, but what's something really good that people like, so like a really good takeaway that people should know?
That you can do a lot yourself. You truly can. Whether you're dabbling first-time designer or developer or a business owner that knows nothing. If you are building your website on Shopify, it's not super difficult to look at the screen and the colors that you're using and question, could I see this if I was squinting from a distance? Could I see this if I'm not very good at seeing light colors? Maybe I should use a darker color for the text. Like, there are all the tools out there that you can use to qualify, like, is this standard color contrast? But, if we just throw all of WCAG and everything out the window for the moment, just put yourself in the shoes of somebody that doesn't see well. Start there. Start with color contrast and just squint at it. And that's where I would begin for everybody. And then you can start dipping your feet into the next level stuff. And when you get as far as, does my hamburger menu work on a mobile phone for someone who's trying to open it with Siri? That's something that most of us wouldn't have a clue how to solve.
Yeah.
And now it's time to bring in a professional. So digging in a little bit, Google some stuff, find out what you can do on your own, and do that. And when you're ready, get a professional.
That's great advice, because when we look at the web content accessibility guidelines, it's not all or nothing. When we look at 2.1 AA, there are 50 different things that we can account for, and many of those are non-technical things. So we can't take care of it all at once, right? Even if you're a professional, it's still going to take weeks to get through. So if you just get started with closed captions, all that requires is effort. It's really not technical. You can look up a tutorial and do it right now. Alt text, not overly technical. These things matter. They improve accessibility. So you're right. Like, there's just a lot you can do. So it's like, don't get overwhelmed by, looking at this entire documentation. Instead, just look at, oh, I can do this, and so on.
Yeah, I recommend not looking at it. If it's not in your wheelhouse, don't look at it. It's not worth it.
That documentation is so daunting, and it just like you start scrolling and you never stop.
And I think it's daunting for 2-3 decades experienced developers who are used to looking at pretty daunting manuals of things, and big walls of code.
I was reading through some of the official requirements yesterday because I was re-recording some of the videos in my course, and you read it and it's so technical. It's like if you haven't gone through this multiple times, you would not understand what this is asking for. It is
Exactly.
the
No, you won't.
wording is ridiculously technical.
Yeah, it is. It takes, I hope that I can go a small smidge of the way to helping interpret some of that for people who are never going to read it and shouldn't have to read it, because it shouldn't be scary. It should not be. Accessibility should not be scary. That is my
Right. It should be inviting. It should be inviting and making it as easy as possible. So what should someone look for in an agency or a company when they're looking for services for accessibility?
Their attitude towards accessibility in the first place. Like, did they talk about it like it's part of the project? Or do they say, yeah, that's going to cost more? Anyone who says outright that's going to cost you more, I don't think that's a good person to work with, because they perhaps aren't digging in, as we talked about, to what accessibility really is. And even to them, it might be checking a box. But I think someone who leads with, this is part of the process. Here's why it's important to you as a business and to humanity in general. Yeah, I think listen to them, listen to the language they use, Google some of the terms, if you find there are words you don't understand. I'm always quite hung up on if somebody says comply or conform. And that's because I recently did the CPAC qualification, and I learned more about what those two terms mean, to the point that on my own website, I changed out comply. I was like, I don't want to use that word. I want to use conform, because conform means I work in the spirit of accessibility. It means every day I do something a little bit more to be an advocate, have my websites be better. So comply kind of makes it feel like there's an endpoint, and there isn't. So yeah, listen to the language that people use.
Well, what about if you go to, let's say you go to a digital accessibility company, so a company or an agency that specializes in accessibility, when you're like your client, let's say you're on a call or a demo, like what are red flags or what are positive signs that you're talking to the right person?
Good question. Well, red flags would be, hey, use an overlay.
Definitely one.
That's like the biggest red flag there is. Okay, you want this little guy in the bottom of your website? We've got you covered. That kind of thing. And if they only focus on blindness, that's another flag, because we all know accessibility. We all know accessibility is more than that. So yeah, I would hope that that's what the person is talking about. That would be a positive sign if they're saying, you might think that accessibility is about this, but it's about so much more. That's what I would want to hear.
One of the things I recommend is that people look for when let's say the agency or whoever you're talking with, they talk in generalities or they talk around things and they don't address specifics. And it's not clear exactly what they are saying, because even though you may be unfamiliar with the concepts or the different services involved in accessibility, someone should be able to understand them in a way in which it is very easy to understand, okay, this is what this does, and this is why it would help me. But where you go wrong is where you have these companies, they're smoothing out their messaging so that they can make everything sound right when it's not right at all.
Yeah.
And so you lose the details because they don't want to go into the details.
Yeah. I would go as far as saying, whoever you're talking to, ask if they can take a quick look at your website and maybe demo something that they see immediately might be a problem. Not wagging fingers, none of that. But hey, here's something I see right now. Or, maybe they do use a quick one of those free wave or something to say, hey, this doesn't mean that you are a bad website owner or a bad developer. It means here's some things you want to look at and then consciously decide how you might address those, or if you don't need to address them. That to me would demonstrate that that person understands that a scan is not the be all end all.
All right, so I think this has been a really good conversation, and I want to end on your business, your agency. First of all, can you tell us an interesting anecdote or an interesting client experience that you've had, good or bad?
My most recent good experience, and this is super exciting, because I said to the universe, when I start this business, I want to help people who help people. That's what I want. I want people to arrive at my door who have a foot in understanding inclusivity and accessibility. Not long after I was talking to the universe about this, a lady who is a speech therapist kind of landed on my doorstep. And she was already excited for this, and already she wanted to walk her talk. And her talk is about, giving people a voice. That's her whole thing. So she had found me through an expert that I know in the accessibility world, and I was like, this is fantastic. And then she works for another nonprofit that is also to do with AAC, and I always forget what the acronyms mean, but
There are so many acronyms.
yeah, so many acronyms, but I am finding that my truth being out in the universe, which is I really want to help people who help people, has resulted in those people finding me and then suggesting me to other people in those arenas. So that's sort of my general happy story about what I'm doing.
That's a good one. And so outside of necessarily it doesn't have to be about accessibility, but what is something that you've had to figure out while you're running your agency, or just, anything that you've learned as a result of your experience?
1,000 different things every day. And I'm sure you're in the same boat. Like, there's always something new to solve. And then luckily I like problem solving, so that's good. You shouldn't start a business if you don't. But structuring my days and my weeks has changed. So from being a project manager on things to owning my own business and invoicing and making sure you're having that client time, checking in on all the projects, structuring my time differently has been the biggest change.
I think that gets, one of the things about being in the accessibility business that I don't think a lot of clients quite understand. And I was talking to someone about this yesterday, is that, he was looking to get referral commissions, and, he was thinking like 30%. And I told him, I was like, look, this is a very frictional business. Like, accessibility is something where, these projects are taking weeks, if not months, and there's a lot of back and forth. And it's just, I can't just give you 30%. Like, that's not going to happen, because it's just the frictional cost really erodes the margins. And it's something where we've seen this too in the marketplace. It's not a straightforward business. This is a different type of business. It's professional services, but it's not as simple something like SEO, which I know is very involved, and there are a lot of different dynamics because of the litigious landscape, and because of the attention to detail that is required, and because we have to constantly check on the checkers who are checking on the checking, right? Like, there's so much that goes into this. It's not necessarily a high margin business, even if you might start out with high margins. So that is something where, like, I try to explain that to people, but I think a lot of people hear like, oh, an audit's going to be $4,500. Like, you're killing it. Like, no, it's not that easy. It's not as simple as like, I'm going to audit and I'm just taking this to the bank. There's a lot that goes into it.
I wish. No, I'm kidding.
And I think what the other part of this is that I just had it. But yeah, it's not that simple. And I think people think that it's more lucrative than it is. I'll tell you who it's lucrative for is the people that are selling solutions, right? Quote unquote solutions. It's definitely more profitable for them. But if you are actually genuinely investing in accessibility, this is something where you're not only, working through all that friction, but there's risk for us, right? That's why we have to be we have to have so much attention to details, because people are relying upon us. Like, to me, it's not even necessarily like, oh, like, you could be sued if you do this wrong. Like, I'm not too concerned about that. What I'm concerned about is that my clients are relying upon me to do an excellent job, and I have to do that no matter what. And so there's a lot that goes into it, and it's not as simple hiring someone off of LinkedIn. Yesterday, somebody told me, oh, just go hire someone off of LinkedIn and you can scale this. And I'm like, no, it is not that easy to do. Like, you have to really pay attention, because you're relying on the people who are your employees or your contractors, and you have to make sure they're doing a good job too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
There's so much that goes into it. And it's like, that's why we're having this podcast. That's a perfect way to end it, because I want people to understand more what this side, understand more of the professional side, like the behind the
Mhm.
scenes, like what's actually going on here.
Yeah.
Now we've talked for, I don't, how long has it been? When did we start? This is over an hour now. We were supposed to
Yeah.
go for 40 minutes.
We could go all day, Chris. We could
I
go all
know.
day.
I mean, the last time we talked for a long time too. But I'm glad we got this recording, and I think this has turned out so well. And I just want to thank you for coming on the channel. And I think your expertise is it's going to be so helpful for so many people. So thank you for coming on. And last, let's talk about where people can find your business, where people can find you and connect with you online.
Sure. Our website is simacweb.com. So SIMACC web.com. And my email is Isla@simacweb.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. I don't do social media yet. It's never really been my thing. Even general social media for my personal life, I can't stay on top of it. So yeah, LinkedIn is kind of where I hang out. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not, I don't like, I have a Facebook, but only for business
Yeah.
purposes. And I like check in on LinkedIn, like, somewhat infrequently, but I check in on
Mhm.
LinkedIn, but like, there's no, I don't have time for any.
No, this is some really good conversation on LinkedIn, and that's why I like to visit, see what people are talking about. And I do like to share things that I think are very inspiring, or even tense. Like, hey, I'm going to share this thing. I do have a tendency to do that. But yeah,
Just see
LinkedIn
what
can be
comes of
fun.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just going to throw this bomb out here and see what happens. Yeah, that's kind of what I was doing with the bill, to be honest. So.
Well, it was so great to have you on, and I am going to link to all of to your website and to your LinkedIn below. And I thank you just again, thank you so much for being on. It was very nice talking with you.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a blast. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so let's see if I can stop the recording.